One of the things that I think is most important about the role that we play is always sort of keeping the eye on the ball and looking at the future.
We have been relevant this long because we're not afraid to evolve.
One of the traits you'll see in successful firms, no decision gets made in the moment and very short term. Most of the really important decisions are made. They're worked up to over a 2 or 3 year period.
Hello and welcome. On this episode, you'll discover how to create a leadership structure as a firm owner that supports your firm's growth without adding stress. The mindset shift that'll transform how you view the balance between creativity and business operations, and the one simple strategy that can help you achieve higher profits with less effort in your small architectural practice. Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. I'm Enoch Sears, founder of Business of Architecture, a team of experts helping elite small architectural practices excel. As a practice owner, you've probably felt the weight of managing both the creative and the business sides of your firm, balancing client expectations, tight project deadlines, and maintaining a healthy bottom line is no easy task. And let's face it, sometimes it feels like you're working harder than ever before and yet not seeing the results that you deserve. If you've ever felt frustrated by not knowing where your next project is coming from, struggling with leadership decisions and getting the right people in the right roles, or wondering if there's a better way to scale your practice without burning out, this episode is for you. Today, Business of Architecture principal Ryan Willard sits down with Roxanne Malek and Troy Thompson, managing partners at SmithGroup, one of the oldest and most successful architectural firms in the United States. Roxanne, who has a passion for creating sustainable, innovative designs for higher education, and Troy, a seasoned expert in cultural and historic preservation, share insights into leading a firm with over 170 years of history. As a reminder, if you haven't already watched the free Firm Owner Smart Practice Method Masterclass, what are you waiting for? Go today to discover how to eliminate overwhelm, slay chaos in your practice so you can focus on the architecture again. To bring forth your best gifts into the world, go to smartpracticemethod.com to get access to the free video and discover how to prevent the business from getting in the way of the architecture. Now, let's jump in and hear how Troy and Roxanne, the managing partners of SmithGroup, tackle the unique challenges of running one of the oldest and most successful firms in the U.S.
Troy and Roxanne, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you both?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ryan.
And so, an absolute delight to be speaking with you. You're both managing partners of the SmithGroup, which is, I believe, is sort of the oldest continuously operating architecture and engineering firm in the US. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And, we take great pride in that. That legacy is really important to us. Troy's often reminded me that the firm has survived Civil War and World Wars, and it just lends great perspective to the way we operate today.
That's extraordinary. So how old is the firm?
It was founded in 1853 in Ohio.
Wow, that's incredible. And you guys have got offices all over the country. I was just looking at it earlier. It seems like there's satellite offices or other offices in most states. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got 20 offices from east to west coast. Pretty well, good coverage across the country.
And a Shanghai office? There's an office in any other global offices, or is it just the Shanghai one?
We do deliver work internationally, but at this point we're primarily focused nationally in terms of our office locations.
Gotcha. And quite an eclectic portfolio: cultural work, government work, health, higher ed, science, technology, a lot of commercial development as well, and at a certain scale of the work that you've been doing. So really excited to be talking with you. And perhaps I could ask you both individually about how you would describe your role as a managing partner, managing director. What does that mean? What do you do?
Sure. Troy, you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll go first. I think one of the things that I think is most important about the role that we play is always sort of keeping the eye on the ball and looking at the future. I think it's so easy to get lost in our projects and what we're doing on a daily basis that we're really good at. That I think at our level, it's very important that we're helping think of where the firm needs to be going, what's going on in the world, what are the pressures outside of design, and the normal things that we deal with on a daily basis. I think the other thing is creating a place where everybody can succeed, and that people feel like they're here because of shared values and we're doing the same things for the right reasons. So a bit of a cheerleader, if you will, but I do tend to, being the historian, really like the taking the long view of things.
Yeah, I would echo Troy and maybe add, while we do have particular areas of purview, we do work very holistically and fluidly across the roles to make sure that we're doing the right things for the firm.
Amazing. So perhaps we could talk a little bit about your individual kind of career paths, and how you became managing partners. Roxanne, perhaps we'll start with you. I know that
Sure.
you've had a distinguished career as an architect.
Yeah.
Um, you started off life as a graphic designer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Maybe just a little bit of perspective on me. So I was born in Iran. My family immigrated here when I was young. And that always really is a foundation for how I've kind of operated. So grew up in San Francisco, attended Cornell University, got my architecture degree, um, graduated at a time where the economy was very bad. And found myself a little bit accidentally in graphic design. I always loved the pace of it, the impact, the immediate impact of the work. So did that for about 5 years. And the economy started to improve. And I thought, well, I never really gave that architecture thing a try. So I should probably give it a shot and see how it goes. And started at a firm back then that was called Stone Maricini Patterson, which later merged into Smith Group. And over the last 27 years, I've had 5 careers at the company. And it's really a testament to how people can grow within one environment. Started off designing buildings for maybe the first 15 years of my career in our science and tech studio. And I loved that project type primarily because of the clients. These are extraordinary people who are changing the world. We worked with scientists at UC San Francisco, at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And again, people who are at the forefront, a cutting edge of research. And so that was really an extraordinary process. Accidentally tripped into being a project manager and really found my way there and enjoyed doing that. Um, and then really got focused on higher ed. It was really a translation from the research work that I had done to a lot of STEM buildings. And so launched our higher ed practice in Northern California. There's nothing like starting something from scratch, even if you're in the umbrella of a larger company. It's really special to have built something from the ground up. So really proud of that. Did that and then realized I wanted to learn a little bit more about the business side of the house. And for me, that's kind of learning. Lifelong learning has always been who I am. So I'm very fascinated by the business and how we as architects can really provide value. So again, that's why your podcast was also fascinating to me is, we are here to design, but we are running a business and want to be successful financially as well. So started as director of operations in our San Francisco office, and then grew that role into the West region. So ran operations for San Francisco, Portland, Sacramento, San Francisco, and LA. And again, that scaling up was really valuable.
Mhm.
Understanding how to build processes and systems to what Troy was saying, building an environment where everyone can be successful and finding ways to scale that up was really important to me. And then our previous managing partner was retiring. And so the opportunity came forward and I applied and really excited to be able to lead the firm into, the next decade.
So that's a very interesting experience. So you've actually, in your career, you've been at the kind of one of the forerunners of actually the expansion of the Smith Group and been involved in like developing new offices, what it takes to actually repeat something, maintain the culture, effectively start a new business, but with the kind of protection, if you like, of a larger group behind it.
Yeah, and I would say, and I think Troy alluded to this, the culture and the support of the company is extraordinary. And it does, we do have an entrepreneurial spirit, but one that's grounded in financial thoughtfulness and care.
Mhm. Brilliant. Troy, how about yourself?
Well, I think the most important point is there are very few of us probably in these roles that set out a path and achieve that goal. I think many of us end up where we are in a very circuitous way, and I think some of the lessons learned are always sort of being open to opportunities when they present because you might not know quite what they are. So part of it is being open-minded, but another part is being willing to take a risk on something that you might not have thought you wanted to do. But that being said, I'm from the Midwest, born and raised in Indiana, town of about 86 people when I went to college. Um, First generation college student on my dad's side of the family, but always wanted to be an architect since sixth grade. Thought that's what I wanted to do. So was successful in that way. But when I did get to college, I did flirt a little while and changed my major from architecture to philosophy. Finished that degree, and then they said, well, your scholarship's now gone. And I said, oh, well, what if I go back to architecture? And they're like, oh yeah, that's a 5-year program. You can have more scholarship. So I went back into architecture. So started there, almost got lost and came back. And then not long after college, a classmate and an older friend in Indianapolis started her own firm, which was a very interesting experience. Again, seeing an opportunity to do something, the timing seemed right. But then just as difficult was choosing to sell it and move on a different path. So part of that was wanting to get to the East Coast and do more historic preservation in a place like Washington, D.C. So my family and I moved out here 20-some years ago. Worked for a consulting firm doing a lot of museum and heritage consulting outside of architecture, more on the owner side or way up front before they hired architects. Fascinating experience. Very different perspective on how owners and clients think and what really drives them in some moments, but missed architecture. And so ended up coming to SmithGroup because they had a big historic preservation practice, a really well-known cultural studio. So I came here to do the cultural work and historic preservation, and like Roxanne, got a little sidetracked and took a leadership role in the DC office. And that was the step that eventually led to this role, and I went in this role now to be 10 years in May. So we've had a lot going on the last decade, and it's been fun. I think part of being in these roles too is you have to find a way to reconcile your relationship to doing projects and all the things
Right.
that you study in school. You think you're going to design and do projects and take care of clients. The more of these roles, the more you get in these roles, the less you get to do that. So I think one thing that's always helped me was having the historian and the philosopher in me. It's easy to sort of see this is another kind of design project. And thinking about SmithGroup, especially with our legacy in the industry of this is a way of having significant impact beyond just the work we do. So it makes it a little bit easier for me to get up every day and not knowing I'm not going to get to do preservation every day.
So that's quite interesting. I often, when I interview kind of managing partners of larger firms, rarely does anybody ever say, I had a dream of being a managing partner and I just went for it. But rather, like as you just
Yeah.
kind of illustrated, it's kind of a set of more organic decisions that kind of you are presented with. What do you think are some of the skills and attributes that both of you have that make you a good fit for actually being a managing partner? Because it's a different set of, and you were alluding to it as well just there, that it's a different set of skills and attributes to being an architect. However, obviously the architectural expertise is, kind of pretty crucial and offers a very unique way of looking at a business.
So, Troy, maybe I can jump in with one thing, and then I'm sure you'll add more. One of the biggest traits is actually the ability to deal in ambiguity. These kinds of roles don't have a lot of parameters around them, and I think the success in the role is how much you can kind of push the envelope and not be fearful of the things that you don't totally understand or control. I think most of the work as an architect can have a control mechanism around it, but these roles really, like I said, are quite fluid. And then, Troy, I'm sure you have more maybe traditional attributes that you need in the role.
Well, but I think that's actually a good example because I think a couple things that come to mind. First of all, it's a little bit hard to define, but just good judgment. And I think there are a lot of things that probably go into that. Most importantly, a diversity of experiences. and playing in a number of roles, but also experiences outside of kind of the business of what we do helps inform good judgment. I think emotional intelligence is another very important piece, and a lot of that plays into the fact that I think many people who might not be in a role like this think that being in this role, you really have control of everything. When you start to realize you probably have less control in some ways in some of these roles because you've got to gather so many constituents and you've got stakeholders, and you've got partners, and you're the one that kind of has to flex to where people are. And because that's how you get people to come together. So I think I think the soft skills are always the most important ones. I don't know that there are a lot of, if you will, hard skills that shape the success in this role, but it's the softer skills. But I think it's also on the other side of the ambiguity is being willing to sort of take on risk and push yourselves, not getting complacent. That's maybe the other side of navigating through ambiguity.
And it may be specific to our roles, but because they're not highly defined, we get to define them.
Mm.
And having the ability to realize where you're having the greatest impact is, I think, a key attribute.
When you, and this will be kind of specifically directed to Roxanne, in your experience of when you're opening up new offices, what are some of the skills that are required for doing that in terms of, because that's a whole new, that's like entrepreneur maxed, where you're
Yeah,
setting up multiple new businesses and then you're trying to preserve something as well, which is really important.
yeah. It does take a lot of finesse, and I would say it's really there's a series of steps. So by process, the firm has a series of process related things that we do. Everything from the very more technical side of validity of the location that we're opening, what's the strategy behind it, what are we hoping to achieve, who are the clients we might engage in. And then, as you alluded to, we have all of the how do you really grow a location and maintain the culture. And we've done it in a number of different aspects, whether it's been a partner that we trusted to open a location, whether we've relied on outside resources to come in and help us to flourish. I think it's setting up those locations to know that they can trust and have the infrastructure of SmithGroup, that they don't have to do it independently, but they have enough, I think, leeway to make good decisions on behalf of the firm. And so there's quite a balance there to be able to do it and navigate it. But I think having the strategy of where you anticipate being is really important. We may start off with a handful of people with the intent of remaining at a handful of people for a reason. Or it may be that we intend to grow to 100 people, right? And so understanding where you're heading in the long run is incredibly valuable.
And I think one of the benefits I think of the larger firm too is you don't have to have every skill or every mindset that you might think you need to run the office, to start
Yeah.
the office, because you do have a lot of infrastructure. I think the bigger thing is we're very sensitive to the idea of culture. We think Smith Group does have values that are time tested, and people are here because of the kind of work we do, which is a reflection of our values. So you want to keep that sort of large umbrella and that value-driven attitude in place, but you also don't want to lose the culture and the feeling of the place. Every city is very different, so that's part of what makes us so much stronger is the diversity of our locations, aside from the markets and disciplines, but just being able to engage with cities and learn about cities and how they're all very different. So we always also look at how do we balance growing and nurturing that local identity and that culture and how that contributes to Smith Group, but also making sure that we do have people who ultimately buy into and support our bigger values, because that's where we get that bigger connection.
Is it project related that kind of is the first facilitator of a new office, or is there kind of research that's being done and market opportunities being analyzed, and someone says, "Hey, we need to be in Detroit, or we need to be over here,"
Well,
All
I'll
of that.
start. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah,
or
yes.
somebody's got a chalet somewhere, and they're like, you
Yeah.
know what?
So
Not
yes
only
to
that
all
one.
of that, but Troy, expand on those because we've had examples of everything you just pointed out.
Yeah, and probably 10 years ago, we thought we had a model that we would try to follow. And I think over the last 10 years, we've moved away from that model, partly because we were trying to rethink who we were and focus on different aspects of who we were for the future. But obviously, the pandemic helped speed some of this up. So all of a sudden, during the pandemic, this whole idea of place and proximity changed as it did for the whole world. So now over the last several years, 6 or 8 years, we've opened some offices for clearly strategic reasons that we wanted to be in that location and we wanted to grow. Others, it seemed to be that's where there was a critical mass of talent. That's where the architecture school was. We do have a couple locations that started largely because of projects or client relationships. But I think the big thing we learned over the last several years was that old model of an office being a mini version of the bigger company doesn't matter anymore, that each office can kind of be what it needs to be successful. They all don't have to be the same size. Some of them can be very small. Some of them can be full of experts. Some of them can be generalists. So I think we now understand a better way of knitting the locations together to serve other purposes other than just having an office in a city.
Well, so what is it then that you're kind of focused on preserving on each of the companies? So if they can become quite diverse in terms of their expertise and the way that they're operating, what is it that's still at their core that makes them uniquely identifiable as we're still Smith's Group?
Yeah, and maybe it speaks to kind of addressing a larger issue, which is it takes a lot of finesse to have processes and infrastructure in place that make us, that optimize what we do, that make us efficient, but then allow us to have the personality of the location. So we do rely really heavily on, um, uh, I would say, events and opportunities that are location specific. And as Troy said, kind of knit folks into the community in which they're serving and in which they reside. To us, that's
Mhm.
really important. So having that balance between the operations side, and I think that's why Troy and I are conversant in this. There's a fine balance between the operational side that runs a company and the real personality and character of place.
Perhaps we could take a little step back here and have you guys explain or describe the kind of business architecture of the company. So perhaps we could talk about the like how is the hierarchy structured? How are studios
Mhm.
structured? How many people you've got? How do you guys make decisions with such a large group?
It's something we focused on a lot over the last 10 or 12 years. And it's driven a lot of our success. And so we don't like to call ourselves a matrix. We try to not be a matrix, even though if we diagram it, it might look like a matrix sometimes. But the basic components are we do have studios that are aligned with markets, healthcare or higher ed or S&T workplace, those types of things. So we have an overarching idea of a national market because we have a national footprint. Then in various locations, we have studios that align with those markets and tend to do work in those markets. But they're still part of driving a bigger strategy of where that market's going, what kind of expertise, that sort of thing do we need. Then across the firm, we also have a discipline structure, which is about knowledge and training and some of the tools that we use. Architects still need to learn to be architects. Engineers still need to learn to be engineers. I think we try to mix that up as much as possible because I think because we have so many disciplines in so many locations, the more those boundaries can break down, the better. But that becomes part of our platform. That's how we train and grow people to deliver the work. Then there's a whole nother group that's tied to kind of our technology and practice, and Roxanne will get into some of this, where it's about the tools that we develop. It's about data. How do we collect and use data? We develop apps that we use with clients on projects and that sort of thing. So it's kind of technology that helps us innovate our process, but also helps us just be more efficient and effective in the way we do things. So we've got the markets at the point for where strategically where we're trying to go. We've got all the discipline structure that you need to grow talent and help people develop. We build a lot of this infrastructure that we try to use as a part of our innovation. We minimize the geography more and more all the time. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've gone from an office-centric organization where each office was its own entity to a regional model, which has really helped break down the edges between those locations. And it's much more fluid now. We share more work than most of our peers, and we share experts quite a bit too. So I think that's part of that cultural question you're asking about. We have some locations that might have a lot of lab planners, but they work all over the firm because that's what lab planners do. So that we spend a lot of time trying to share work and expertise.
Well, and maybe I can push on two additional things because you asked, how do we make decisions? So a lot of it is built on trust, and our really important placement on succession planning, knowing who it is that we can rely on to carry some of these initiatives forward, is one piece. And then Troy mentioned that we do have a lot of discipline. So we're very much an integrated firm, and that translates across architecture, interior design, engineering, landscape, civil. And it's really in response to solving our clients' greatest challenges. So having clarity across those can be challenging at times, for sure. But it's founded on trust, and it's founded on really prioritizing our clients. It's very little about Smith Group at the end of the day.
Mhm.
It's very much about our clients. And I kind of half joke. It's quite a simple formula, right? Uh, do the right things and provide high value for our clients. Have a lot of fun doing it and make a lot of money at the same time. It's actually not. It's very simply stated, very hard to deliver. But it is really what perpetuates me because we tend to shy a little bit away from the business side of it, because we're in general, we're trying to do the right thing for our environment, right? And so people tend to be shy about it, and I'm not. We're operating a business.
Mhm.
I'm unapologetic about being profitable. We have people who work really hard, and I want to make sure that they are, they're taken care of financially, right? And that's our mission. It's not about the company; it's about our people and our clients at the end of the day.
How big is the firm, and what are the biggest kind of offices?
Sure. So we're almost 1,600 people now.
Hmm.
And I think maybe 8 years ago, we were about 1,000. So that growth has been pretty substantial over the
Wow.
decade. Yeah. And again, welcoming new people, right? And making sure that they have an environment where they can succeed is really part of our large mission. Our largest locations are in Detroit, San Francisco, DC, and Phoenix, I think probably are the four largest.
And have you always only grown through kind of the setting up of new offices, or have you been involved in acquisitions and kind of merging of other firms?
Troy, why don't you jump in there and maybe go
Yes.
back because we've been around for so long, go back to 2000, right? Because it's been
Yeah,
quite an adventure.
this actually kind of sets up kind of our more recent story because we have been around, so we have, I think, probably tried everything at some point, as the industry has. But in the '90s, the firm really went on a different path, with the acquisition of firms in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. in particular. And that really changed the footprint of the firm, and I think really started to shape the culture of the firm going forward as well. At that point, Detroit was several hundred people. It was a very big office, very big, standalone office. Um, so I think that was the first step in the '90s, but that's also the time that we were doing all kinds of other things, some of which were way ahead of their time, I think. Like getting into real estate and setting up technology companies and really, I think, sort of challenging what the future business model of Smith Group should be. Um, some of those things then caught up with us in the early 2000s at the turn of the millennium, but the geography and the infrastructure of the firm stayed in place. And so that really was what set us up to be kind of who we are today, even though we had to sort of recover from some of the other things that were probably more secondary or experiments, if you will. But things of which we're asking ourselves, maybe we should be doing them now that the world's caught up with those ideas. Um, so I think since then we have done a handful of small acquisitions in Boston and Dallas and Phoenix and Denver. Those are all been spread out over the last 15 years or so. So, but none of them were as big and probably having the same kind of impact on the firm that the ones in San Francisco and DC did.
And in terms of the history of the firm, so it's been around for a long time. We were looking at over 170 years. If you look back over that time frame, what is still left from the kind of early days, other than the name?
Well, we're in our building we designed 100 years ago in Detroit.
Oh, there we go.
there are those kind of things.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing. That's amazing.
One of our partners shared recently the 125th anniversary book, and I had a quiet moment one Sunday, and I picked it up, and I actually couldn't put it down. I read it cover to cover. Appreciate that I work at SmithGroup, so it was maybe a little bit more meaningful to me directly. But um, in 1974, during the oil crisis, we were putting solar panels on the building that we had designed to test our energy consumption in the building. And that just seems so far ahead of its time. It was really quite powerful for me. It just was a reminder of people who are being so inventive. And how can we do that now? And here we are, fast forward like all these years later, and that's exactly what we're doing. So I really appreciated looking back at that legacy and learning from it to really help inform our future.
And you do think about it. So, we're older than some of our clients. General Motors, we're older than General Motors, and we worked with them, for coming up on a century, I guess. So I think there's a fascinating history of the profession that could be written as a history of Smith
Yeah.
Group, because, electrifying Detroit, you can go back to some really major milestones in the evolution of cities and architecture, and you can see where somehow we played a very important role in that early on. And so that legacy does accrue, and it is part of the mindset. I think most people know we're old. They might not know the specifics of it, but they sort of recognize that we've been through some of these things, especially when we can go pull out the drawings, or they talk to somebody whose grandfather worked for Smith Group 40 years ago. So it's fun.
In order to be able to kind of perpetuate an organization for that length of time, you've got to be good at reinventing yourself or having a kind of rebirth and being able to look forward and kind of, making way for the next succession plan. What does identifying leadership look like for you guys kind of individually when you're kind of working with team members, and what does it look like on a more sort of broader scale of the organization? Like, who's going to be taking over the next managing partner roles? How do you start to um, look for the skill sets and train people to kind of take the reins?
So I'll let Troy should start, but I'll just say there's never a start. It's a continual
Yeah.
process. It never starts and ends because we have so many roles, and as you said, we have been relevant this long because we're not afraid to evolve. And we, you also have to manage risk. So there's again quite a fine balance of managing risk, but also finding ways to take some risks in order to do that to make that evolution. But Troy, you have a lot more history with the processes that we have in place.
Well, I think sometimes you have to back up and sort of ask yourself, what do you need? Because what you need in the future isn't probably what you're doing today in terms of structure, skills, talent, mindset, all of those types of things. So, it's a great timing because we just kicked off over the last couple of weeks a new strategic plan process that we're launching. But we did a strategic plan in 2016, and it very intentionally was meant to change how we think of ourselves and what we want to be going forward. As we mentioned, we did a lot of things in the 90s and early 2000s, kind of got in a little bit of a bind. So we spent the first decade of the 2000s really getting our house back in order, putting some financial controls and good management practices in place, but was managing to grow the firm while we were doing that and still achieve certain goals. But we got to the point where we realized, we're very well managed. We don't get in debt now, all those things, but we need to focus more on our clients. We need to focus more on design and how we do what we do. So that strategic plan made a very clear statement that the future is going to be changing faster than we've ever seen it change, and it's going to get here faster. At that point, we weren't ready to say what it was, but we knew we weren't ready for it. So we focused on doubling down on design culture and looking at things that help us be better as designers, how to think of ourselves more as designers, looking at how complicated our clients' problems are getting, looking at how we're engaged with community and building staff and all of those types of things. So our idea was in a few years, the future is going to be here, and we want to be able to grab it and start to own more of it instead of letting the world shape kind of the value of what a design firm is. It was incredibly successful. And it really did change, I think, the way we think about ourselves, but it certainly gave us a different set of checks and balances and questions we would ask before we would do something. But out of that came a very different leadership model right before that plan started, where we had a traditional CEO, COO model.
Right.
Before we launched into that plan, we said we need more capacity and a range of expertise at that level to be able to focus on building the kinds of things we need to build to be a different firm in the future. It wasn't the traditional business as usual, and those are essentially business roles, right? So that was how we came up with the idea of the managing partner instead of those chief titles, and that's also how we ended up with 3. So we came out of that process right before we did the strategic plan with the 3 managing partners, each focusing on building certain parts of the firm, but also maintaining the things that went well. So over the last decade, we've kind of gone through that plan, and as Roxanne noted, we've now started cycling and rotating the managing partners. So right now, this strategic plan is meant to say, okay, what do we need for the next decade? Because we'll start to do some more transitions now of senior leadership and the roles that we've just put in place. But we want to do this plan over the next year to see, what is that future? So I always approach it first, what do we need? Where are we going? And I think Roxanne did touch on some of the things that you just always have to be giving people opportunities. And a lot of times you have to make opportunities. They don't just show up. You got to find something that you want to dig into and say, wait a minute, Roxanne and I don't need to figure this out. We need to go get these 8 really smart people, hopefully smarter than us, to figure it out and do that. So you have to very intentionally make the opportunities. But it's ongoing.
Yeah, and in the spirit of evolution, so Troy mentioned the 3 managing partners, but you only have two of us today, and it's because one of our partners is retiring. But rather than replace that role, we've built a series of director groups that are bringing the decision making to the right levels, right? And they have a lot more proximity to some of the work than Troy and I would ever have, or the 3 of us would ever have. So that's sort of the next evolution of the firm, is that we're again right sizing the roles for what the firm needs.
So as being the kind of, you've got the managing partners at the let's call it the top of the hierarchy, and then the directors that are kind of surrounding that
Mhm.
that are making decisions, and then the rest of the business kind of expands out from that kind of structure.
Yeah.
What would you, because you obviously were very clear about, we're making a difference here between the old CEO kind of positions and managing partners. What was that transition? What's the difference?
The initial transition, or as we're starting to go through it now?
Both.
Well, it was I have to give our former CEO and CEO credit, because they were amazing in the way they thought this through. They were the real impetus for saying, wait a minute, we need to be different going forward. We haven't been able to pay attention to some of the things we wanted to. We've been focused on this or that. So they actually created the process that we use, which started with asking, what do we need? What's the future? Then there was a second, more traditional kind of nominating and selection committee once those roles were determined. But neither one of them were part of the process of deciding what the roles would be, let alone who went in them. You're not allowed to pick your successor at SmithGroup, was one of our lines. And so that was a much longer process, because we were asking much bigger questions. But I think you always are trying to think 2 or 3 steps down the road. So at that time, even when the original 3 of us went in these roles, we were trying to map out, in that same spirit of getting a diverse set of experiences and talents to tackle the things that the firm needs to tackle, what are the leadership groups that we need to be putting in place that we didn't have, to let them start to take that on. So over time, there was always the question of whether or not we always needed 3, because if we're successful at getting the right decisions being made with the right groups of people, it's going to be quicker. It's probably going to be the better decision. It should make us more effective by having the right group of people worrying about the right metrics and the right, answering the right questions. So that's part of how the Sheldon strategic plan helped us do that, get those leadership positions in place. So now it's a very different discussion about transitioning when Mike transitioned out and Roxanne transitioned in, or when Russ is now transitioning out, and we chose not to replace him. It was because we've got all this other leadership in place. I think one other thing that's important to think about, before all of this happened, we went through a process where we looked at all of our resource groups, marketing and HR and accounting and IT. And we looked at how could they be better organized and more efficient, but also how could they take on more responsibilities. I think a lot of people leading architecture firms kind of like to do some accounting if they give them a chance, or they think they're an IT person. We don't do that. So
Yeah.
we consciously spent a couple years before we made other changes in the firm getting those resource groups better organized and optimized, and building them out so that they could actually take on more decisions too, that used to go to the CEO or to an office director or something. Let's let the professionals make those kinds of decisions, which then let us shape these roles in a way that we're really focused on the practice. We're focused on where's the firm going, what kind of work do we need to win, and how do we do better work all the time? What's the future of how we deliver work?
And it does go back to what Troy said initially about it's really a design problem at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? What is it what's that consistent level that you want to draw across these groups? How much autonomy do you want or need to give them so they can be successful and you're not overburdening them? It's a real art to kind of build out those groups and get them to a place where they can be successful but completely connected to the firm. Right.
How far into the future are you thinking? And the reason why I asked this question is because I notice as businesses get larger, you have an ability to be able to think further into the future than, say, like a smaller business that often is kind of much more reactive. And if we look at, kind of Japanese businesses, in Japanese business culture, I'm always intrigued by, the CEO of Panasonic, who would imagine like a 700-year plan for the organization with different epochs. But how
Yeah.
far into the future do you guys think about with your own succession planning, and how often do you do this kind of exercise that you've just outlined, where you kind of reimagine where the company could be and what it's going? Is it something that's happening all the time, or are there kind of major periods where it's like, okay, we need to shake things up?
Yeah, let me maybe preface a little bit of this and already say that Polly, Troy, and I don't always agree on this. So we'll share our own insights. The
Yeah.
preface is we've been incredibly successful the last 3 to 5 years, like
Mhm.
incredibly. I think more than we might have imagined, and everything
Mhm.
from the kind of work we're doing, the kind of clients we're engaged in, the design awards that we've been winning, the financial success, all of that has been really amazing. So when you ask why, like what prompts you to do these kinds of kind of re-look at the business, it's really hard to convince people that we should be changing, right? But
Mhm.
it's in those very moments that you're starting to be super successful that you got to look ahead. So we have forced ourselves to do that. And that's been taking a lot of courage as leaders to be able to say we've been very successful, but we're ready to evolve. And so with that, that's the preface. I'll
That's
turn it
really
over to Troy,
interesting.
and we won't. And I promise we probably won't agree on sort of timeframes, but you start, Troy.
Well, I tend to, nobody tends to agree with me on timeframes because, again, I can't help but think in terms of historical patterns. So I'm worried about 50 years from now, even though
Is it?
I won't be here for that. So most of the time, though, we just disagree on duration, not trajectory, which is helpful. But I think as you were asking the question, I was thinking, our Sheldon strategic plan was a 5-year. We called it Sheldon 2021, because we knew we needed to get prepared for the future. This one, we're starting with about a decade time frame in terms of how far we're looking, but we know there are going to be parts of it that are a 2 or 3 year plan because technology, changes quickly, culture changes by generation. So, but I think we are pushing ourselves a little bit this time compared to the last plan. But I think it's because we're trying to be more aggressive about grabbing the future and helping shape the future. So therefore, you got to pay attention to a different scale of change and a different type of change.
How does the transition of ownership work, as well as the firm is kind of evolving and growing? Is ownership kind of spread amongst the a whole group of people, amongst the whole team, or is it kind of consolidated? or is there and then another entity that owns the organization, or?
No other entities. It's actually quite straightforward and kind of brilliant in its simplicity. So we do have broad ownership.
Mhm.
There's a couple hundred owners at the firm, and the transition is very clearly laid out on stock transitions and the solvency of the company. And it's not, again, an overcomplicated process, but it's well understood by the partners here. And it's been this way since I've been at Smith Group. And I think for me, it's one of the foundational pieces that is
Right.
incredibly reliable and not something that we would want to change, right? In the spirit of like, keep the things that work really well for you, this is one of them. It's been quite successful over the years, and I can't imagine that it wouldn't be, for at least the next decade.
And we don't micromanage it on a year-to-year basis because we've got systems in places, but we are always looking 3, 4, 5 years down the road at kind of the demographic of the ownership and getting an idea of what people's patterns are, because people retire differently now than they did 20 years ago. So we try to keep an eye on that and make sure that we're making the transitions every year of the right amount of stock.
And it has enough, to Troy's point, it has enough flexibility in it for
Mhm.
us to manage at that level. But he's absolutely right. It's not an annual kind of management process. There's not a lot of surprises because it's been going on for so long. It's quite predictable, and having that foundation is really important to our success. Right? It kind of underpins that we don't have to worry about that. We know that that is an underlying foundation that we can rely on.
Cool. And so is it a case that when you come to retire, the company buys back your stocks and then redistributes it to the rest of the team, or when people kind of become owners, are they gifted it, or does it happen through deferred compensation, or do they take out business loans and buy in, or?
We have some philosophical conversations about these. Troy, share the mechanics, and I'll share my philosophy.
Um, yeah, so the board is the one that's responsible for electing new owners. So we have a formal nomination and vetting process every year that we go through. Ultimately, then the board will nominate a group of new owners. At that time, each new owner is expected to buy a certain amount of stock.
Mhm.
We help them get loans and guarantee the loans and things, but they still buy it. Then once you get to a certain level, once you become a senior principal, then you start to get more stock out of your bonus, and so that title tends to be aligned with your roles in the firm, which means you're starting to be in a position where you're making decisions and affecting the firm. So the higher up you go in leadership roles, then the more stock you have to own, and because you're making bigger decisions, and that for the most part of the last 2.5 decades, that's happened through the bonus program after the
Mhm.
initial buy-in.
I think it's pretty traditional for a number of firms. They're set up quite the same way that we are. Philosophically, that ownership conversation is really important. The difference between a shareholder at Smith Group and then actually being an owner, and it sometimes is challenging to have that innate ownership feeling across a couple of hundred people, right? And so we work really hard at making sure that we're all responsible as owners for the vitality of the firm and the financial success and all of the goals that we've set out.
So it's kind of interesting. It does relate to your question before about how far you look and plan in the future. This system hasn't changed in this century. How's that sound? Um,
Wow. Wow.
so it started evolving in the early 2000s, but it's been in place through our predecessors and through Mike and Russ and I, and now Roxanne and I, because it didn't need to change. It serves its purpose.
Mhm.
But I think whether it's ownership transition or even looking at strategic plans and all those other things, I think one of the traits you'll see in successful firms, no decision gets made in the moment and very
Mhm.
short term. Most of the really important decisions are made. They're worked up to over a 2 or 3 year period, or at least a year, if not longer. So I think when you've got systems like this, you can't just go in and sort of adjust it right away, because you need to understand that you're doing this over the long haul, just like when you're developing talent or putting a new strategic plan in place. You need to be anticipating where that's going, and you need to get some things going ahead of time before even most people may know that you're thinking about it, to get to that point where you can be successful or make the changes that you anticipate needing to make.
And sometimes we get the question, so when is that strategic plan going to start? And it says a lot to. I always say the magic's in the transitions of these things, right? That's what keeps you successful in the moment, but sets you up for the future. And it takes a lot of wherewithal to be able to do both of those at the same time.
How do you, talking a little bit about vision and about ownership of the organization, and you kind of giving people the ability here to actually create or own an asset, and then they're involved in the kind of the increasing value of that asset. How do you balance a conversation around being profitable, the kind of making sure that there's a healthy amount of money that's coming into the organization, whilst still being creative or experimental, innovative? How does the culture around profit and money manifest itself in Smith Group?
It's quite fascinating, actually. Again, I think I mentioned as a profession, we tend to be a bit shy about the finances, right? For us, it always starts with the values and the culture that we've set, doing the right things for our clients and helping them solve the greatest challenges. It actually doesn't start with the financial mindset. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean, so we do that, we're in earnest trying to do the right things for the environment and our clients. Um, but we have, I would say, extraordinary processes in place to really leverage what it is that we've brought in terms of the work. And how can we provide high value to our clients and reward our staff? And we do, again, there's mechanisms in place that uh, evaluate project success across a lot of metrics. And financial metrics are certainly one of them. And I definitely drive the point home. You got to bring value to our clients. It's not always about making more money. It's about making the right money. And it's got to be of high value to our clients. And sometimes that means we get paid a little more for certain things. But it's just got the scope's got to be aligned with where they're seeing, their business driving, or where we're really contributing in a way that they rely on us as partners, just not just transactionally on any particular project, but as long-term partners.
Yeah, and I think over the last few years, we've also talked a lot about the reason you do need to grow and the reason you do have money is because we want to have these other things that make us better. If you want a director of research, you need to be a successful, profitable firm. If you want to develop your own apps for campus planning that our clients can use, you've got to have the cash to do that. So we've tried to talk about growth and profitability in terms of serving other means. One, growth is about opportunity for staff. If we don't grow, people are going to kind of be stuck where they are. But you also aren't going to be able to innovate and do the types of things to be better. And so, especially for the last several years, we've talked about growth and the profit that comes along with it are to give more opportunity to staff, but also to help us sort of shape what we do and actually be leaders in what's going on in the industry and the world as well. And so I've been the one that, again, this is the one where I'm a little bit on the side where I'm like, look, if we do these other things that we say are important that we're doing and we do them well, we can't help but make money, as long as we're not stupid in some other way, right?
Mhm.
So I say that a lot. Sometimes Roxanne and Russ will look at me, but I think that the proof has kind of been in that pudding. I think it's helped people not be afraid of growth, because a lot of times if you say we want to double the firm, that'll scare people. Or if you say we need to be more profitable, they're like, why? We want to do better architecture on this project. It's like, well, no, if you do better architecture on that project, we'll probably be more profitable because we probably did a better job too.
Mhm.
So we have, without talking about it, we've sort of shaped the culture around the relationship between growth and profit to who we want to be, which I think has been the key to our success.
Yeah, and then just to expand on that a little bit, our clients are asking different things of us than they did even a decade ago. We are getting involved in conversations that I can't imagine having had, like I said, even 10 years ago. The conversations around energy aren't around a building, right? It's expanding beyond the footprint of the work that we may be doing. And I think being able to address those challenges for our clients and having the services available has, again, made us really good partners. And I think that's what I hold really proudly. It's not the financial reward is as Troy said, it's it's the outcome of what we've been doing, right?
Mhm.
It's not driving the process.
How do you position yourself as that ally, advisor, advocate for your clients? Because it's interesting that you mentioned that a few times now, that about bringing value to the client, which means you need to know what value is for the client, as opposed to us as architects. What we often do is try to impose our architectural value onto a client, but first there's a kind of understanding what does value mean for them.
Yeah, I do think you have to, a healthy ego is good, but you gotta check it at the door, right?
Mhm.
You need to really, ask a lot of questions and make sure you're answering the questions that really need to be answered. And I think if I look back on, the industry, and, Troy's got a lot deeper perspective on it than I do, but if I look back in the duration I've been in the industry, it used to be, there was a client that asked for a building, and then we would design a building, and sometimes there would be a black cape person that came in and drew a little, cocktail napkin sketch, and somehow that became a building. With all the data that sorry, that was a little snide. Um, but with all of the data and information that we have, with the extraordinary talent that's available, we're just able to broaden the way we inform our work. And so I think building the trust with our clients that we're bringing to them best of class information for them to help shape the decisions is really important. I think we have a breadth of relationships across the country, whether we're working at 300 universities, right, across our portfolio. So the information isn't discrete in one location. It's really, what are your peers doing? Here are best practices, and which one of these applies to your business model. And so we can bring a depth of experience that I think helps our clients to be able to start answering those tough questions.
And I think this is actually one of the most hopeful aspects of I think what's going on in architecture today, because I think there's a generational shift happening where my generation are thinking about architecture starting to prove to be a little bit antiquated and not particularly relevant to what's going on in the world. But staying involved in our universities and sitting on thesis juries and things like that, I think you see the folks coming out of college now and the ones in college, they're all thinking about architecture as doing more than just being a built thing. Um, they see its whole reason for being to solve some issue, whether it's the environment or a social issue or a community issue, or help cure cancer, not just a hospital, but, taking part of bigger narratives of what our clients are all part of really doing. And even in the past, some of our clients probably didn't think that much about those other types of impacts they were having, even though they might have known it. So I think there is a shifting perspective and hope for what architecture becomes in the future that I think is very different than, when our generation went to school. But I think it's the future, and it means we'll have very different relationships with our clients. We need to bring all kinds of different expertise and thought and mindsets to solve these problems in a much different way, but also know that we're affecting a bigger scale of everything we do as well.
And I have heard, as Troy kind of said, that there is an optimism and a hope. And sometimes there's a lot of pessimism in our industry. It just sort of innately is either who we are, or we've got people pushing on us. If you take it in the way that Troy just described it, I'm incredibly hopeful of what it is that we can offer. And I hope that others see the potential of that, because when we all went to school, even if it was specific or discrete to architecture, we were thought to think as designers, right? And I think at the forefront, that's what drives the way we do our work.
Mm.
And then bringing in the resources that you need. But it's always designing different design problems, whether it's the firm, whether it's your project, whether it's understanding your client. They fundamentally have a lot in common, and it is about being creative in its response.
Brilliant. I think that's the perfect place to conclude the conversation. So, Troy and Roxanne, that was absolutely amazing. I really appreciate your time and sharing with myself and the listeners here behind the scenes of of Smith Group and the evolution.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan. It was really a pleasure to meet you.
And here's today's Smart Practice tooltip. You didn't go to architecture school to referee client requests and nickel and dime your way to survival. Scope creep is a systems issue, not a you issue. And we created something that fixes this for you, the Scope Creep First Aid Kit. It gives you word-for-word scripts, client emails, and team coaching tools so you can empower your team to prevent the scope creep before it ever gets to you. If you're exhausted from saying yes when you really mean no, this is your toolkit. Get this smart practice tool for free by going to businessofarchitecture.com/creep. Thank you to our recent listeners who left reviews for the podcast on iTunes. Your reviews help others find this podcast, so this rising tide raises all boats. To be acknowledged on this show, open up the podcast app on your phone. Search for Business of Architecture. Scroll down to the bottom after you click on the show and leave a review. As a reminder, today's episode of the Business of Architecture show is sponsored by Smart Practice, the world's leading step-by-step solution for managing a small architectural practice so that the complexity of business doesn't get in the way of the architecture, because you see, it likely isn't your architecture skills that hold you back right now. Perhaps it's the business side of running a practice, managing projects and people, dealing with clients and contractors, and money. So if you're ready to stop feeling like a glorified administrator and get back to architecture again, go visit smartpracticemethod.com. In 45 minutes, you'll know more about small practice management than the majority of small practice firm owners. Go to smartpracticemethod.com. And as a reminder, the views expressed on the show by our guests do not represent those of the host, and we make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to fuel your freedom, your fire, and your flow. Carpe diem.